Serious, hikers, campers, and outdoors people of Reddit, what is the scariest/creepiest/most unnerving encounter you have had with another person in the wilderness? My dad's story is not creepy, but the situation was dangerous as hell. My family is originally from the USSR. My dad and his buddies used to go on long and very cool kayaking and hiking trips every summer. The trips were about a month long and were usually far away from civilization. One of their last trips before we immigrated was to northern Siberia, to a very remote region with a whole lot of rivers. They were very far north, but this was the height of summer, so the weather was great. The problem was that they were so far north that there was significant compass variation where magnetic north was far enough from true north for the compass to be completely useless without a correction. They had no idea that this was a thing and had no idea how off their orientation was. They got absolutely and irredeemably lost. They stayed lost for about a week. Food and water were fine, plentiful fish and some game, and very clean rivers. The problem was that the summer is very short and if they continued to be lost they would get killed by the weather in a few weeks. Luckily for everyone involved, they ran into a party of geologists that were on a prospecting trip. They told them the compass variation error and pointed them towards the nearest town, still a week's trip away. A couple years ago, me and two of my buddies decided to go camping out in Pisca. We didn't go to a designated campground, but just hiked for a while and found a spot where others had camped. The spot was solid and we did the usual camping stuff and put anything that could have smelled or attracted any animals far away from our site. Right when we got in our tent, it started raining like hell and we all passed out. In the middle of the night, some loud as duck thunder woke us up and we were checking our watches to see what time it was when we heard these voices that sounded like little kids somewhere nearby and towards the direction of our food. Couldn't hear them well and just assumed another hiking group had found our food. But then I realized that I was only hearing kids' voices, sounded like 5 to 6-year-olds. I thought for sure they were animal noises but then I heard a child, high-pitched laughter. Ducking scared the crap out of me. The voices eventually stopped and I assumed I must have just been imagining it and I look over at my buddy in my tent who was also white as a ghost. I was about to ask if he was hearing the same crap I was and then we started hearing ducking footsteps walking towards us. They were soft enough that I kept telling myself that it was an animal. But it got so close to our tent that I could hear the individual wet leaves crushing underneath these steps. At this point, I'm about to piss my pants because I may be a big guy, but I hate scary crap. The footsteps got so close that it looked as if it was right outside our tents. And then, without anything else happening, it just walked away. My friend and I didn't speak and just laid there for a couple hours and then passed out after the adrenaline had cooled down. To this day, we don't talk about it, but I wish I had looked out the tent. Edit. Yes, the food was still where we hung it up in the morning untouched. However, we strung it up fairly high up a tree. Not so much creepy but definitely nerve-wracking and embarrassing. I was camping and to enter the campsite, which was just a farmer's field, you have to cross over a disused rail track. Now as one usually does after a few beers and greasy junk food I had to go poop. There was a perfectly suitable tree to lean against and do my business that was close to the rail track and would keep me out of sight of the others I was camping with. So down to business I get, perfect trouser placement, only down to just above the knees for those wondering how to poop in the wilderness, and back firmly and securely placed against the tree. Now I know what most of you are probably thinking at this point, that wasn't a disused rail line. Well, you'd be wrong, but that doesn't stop people from walking down it, or in this case going for an afternoon jog with your dog. The whole encounter was fairly cordial to be honest. I spotted him before he spotted me but there was no time to do anything about it. After he briefly glanced my way and immediately knew what was going on, he let out a gentle morning, to which I replied morning. He then followed up with, whilst steadily increasing his pace to escape this horrendous situation we've found ourselves in, camping I'm just up the lake and there's nowhere quite like what you've found to take a decent crap. And that was that. Or so I thought. Having a good chuckle and a few beers later that evening round the campfire, my girlfriend needed the toilet. And I told her about the tree which is perfect for doing such business only 30 feet away. So off she goes into the darkness, only to seconds later let out a surprised yelp. As she comes running back towards us, hot on her heels is the dog I saw with the man earlier. Now we were the only people on this campsite/farmer's field, so as she's coming back towards us clearly flustered, stating she just literally rubbed elbows with some guy taking a crap resting against the tree as she had her pants halfway down leaning against the tree also. Not knowing he was there as he had stayed completely silent, probably not wanting to be seen, we were understandably confused. The devil's lettuce and witch's brew probably didn't help the situation. The whole ordeal came to a close when an angry herald was shouted from the darkness and the dog ran away, followed by the sound of crunching stones underfoot synonymous with the pebbling used to scatter around rail tracks. And that's my story of the Midnight Mystery Crafter. Not my story, but it happened to my grandfather. He likes to deer hunt. He goes out around 3 a.m. and will stay out until daylight. He told me one day he had no luck and decided to pack up and head back out to his car, which was quite a ways out. As he was walking through the woods, he noticed his footsteps seemed a lot louder than they should be, and this continued on for another 10 to 15 minuets. At the time it was still pretty much pitch black out in the woods, so he couldn't see anything behind him. He started to panic when he realized someone was in fact following him. He pulled up his bow and arrow and said, "I can hear you. If you don't show yourself, I'm sending this arrow straight back." And he heard a man say, "Wait, I'm just lost and I was following you to find my way out." He actually ended up helping the man, but he made him walk in front of him the rest of the way. Grandpa told me he felt like he had other intentions. Fixed my words. About a year ago, I visited my friend who lived in the mountains. It was a heavily forested area with no more than 1,000 residents. Despite him having lived there for multiple of years, we came across a brand new, giant tree house. He'd never seen it and we decided we would sleep in it that night. We brought his dog, set up our hammocks in the tree house and quickly fell asleep. Now this tree house wasn't in someone's yard or anything, it was in the middle of a forest about a good mile away from civilization. Also, it would have been very dangerous to drive a car at night to this location. About 3 o'clock that morning, I hear something coming up the stairs and then his dog growled. His dog knew something was there. It became silent and I just laid in fear that someone was there. Strangely, I never heard any vehicles and my friend stayed asleep the entire time. We never found out who or what it was, but I was scared out of my mind. Edit. Here are the pictures of the treehouse. Picture 1 of treehouse. Picture 2 of treehouse. Went hiking with a group of 3 other guys. Started on a trail, but then slowly made our way off. We grew up doing the same and were very familiar with the woods. We had backpacks with us, plenty of water, a whistle, and one weapon. I'm not a gun person, but I always make sure to have something with us when we go hiking, because reason. Like I said, me and my buddies had done this thousands of times and it all felt very normal and safe for us. The terrain was nothing too crazy, so we didn't need any climbing gear for anything. We were walking in somewhat familiar territory when we noticed a man a bit up ahead leaned over with one of his hands posted up on a tree. We looked around and didn't see anyone else and he didn't appear to have any gear. We got within about 50 feet and yelled out to him, making sure everything was alright. Also seeing if he needed medical attention for anything as he was leaned over. The guy didn't say anything back. Not feeling stupid enough, we sort of circled around the guy, keeping the distance about the same, but trying to get a better view. We yelled out again. No answer. One of the guys walked up a bit closer and noticed the guy had a huge knife/machete. He stopped immediately and yelled back, "Weapon." The man posted up on the tree heard him yell weapon and immediately stood up and faced up, still holding his knife/machete. My other friend brandished his gun and yelled to the guy, "Hey man, we don't want any trouble. Don't come any closer with that." The guy on the tree still didn't say anything, but took a step towards us. Our friend that had closed the gap started backpedaling slowly while my friend with the weapon took a step towards the guy, repeating, "Don't come any closer." The guy didn't seem to care, he still didn't say anything. He took one step and stopped. Took a step and stopped. He was playing some sort of game in his mind. My friend with the gun decided it wasn't worth the risk and told us to leave quickly. He started to backpedal too quicker. The guy at the tree never really quickened his pace. Just took one step every other second. As soon as we felt comfortable by putting more distance between us, we all ran. Looking back occasionally. We called it in after we felt we had lost the guy, saying some lunatic was out in the middle of the woods with a weapon and was a potential danger. Scared the hell out of me for a good bit. Went on a day camping trip with my friend and her boyfriend that she had recently met on the internet. We are out in the middle of nowhere, Montana, not a soul around. No cell reception and I'm not from Montana, so I don't really know where TF we are. Dude is way bigger than either she or I, we're both petite girls. The creepiness starts while we're driving around off-roading in my friend's mom's truck looking for a place to park and set up camp. My friend's BF is driving. We come across a potential spot and she and I get out to scope it out. While we're doing this, he backs the truck out and starts to drive away. I turn to my friend and say, "What the duck is he doing?" And she starts to run after him, waving him down. He finally stops about a quarter mile away and lets us in. He doesn't say anything and she just brushes it off as well. He must not have liked that spot. We find a different spot up the road and this time I wait until he gets out of the car before I get out. I tell my friend that she should hold on to the keys. He starts getting really quiet and sulky and won't help us set up our site. Then he starts walking away in one direction without saying a word and just keeps walking. My friend runs after him to catch up with him and ask him if everything is okay. When she does catch up to him and stops to catch her breath, he turns around and starts walking in the other direction without saying a word to her. He comes back to the side and starts rolling around on the ground in the dirt. At this point I tell her we need to go. She says everything is fine and I am ruining the trip by not just having a good attitude and trying to get along. He keeps rolling and acting bizarre, so she finally agrees to leave. He is still the one driving, and as we're headed back, out of nowhere he stops the truck and just sits there. Then he gets out of the truck and starts walking around a pile of rocks and wood. I tell her that if he does anything that makes me seriously think he's gonna hurt us, I have pepper spray with me and I won't hesitate to use it. Eventually he gets back in the truck and mumbles something about just wanting to check it out. He didn't kill us and nothing else happened, but I felt really freaking vulnerable out there in the middle of nowhere with no one but my delusional friend and this creepy internet stranger. It actually cost our friendship because she simply didn't want to see that there was anything wrong with anything that happened that day and she couldn't wait to see him again. I used to hitchhike, so I've got buttloads of creepy stories. Probably the creepiest I can remember is when I was hiking through the deep south, in northern Louisiana. I was north of a small town called Quitman out in the woods. It's pretty heavily forested up there and fairly rural. I had been passing through this forested area on an old county highway at just about midnight. So I'm minding my own business, my ears are always alert, had been on the road continuously at that point for about 4 years, and I see some strange ass ducking blue light off in the trees to my right. I'm like, WTF is that? So I kinda walk a little slower and I can see it's headed towards the road, but it's like 100 feet in front of me, so I can tell if it hits the road it'll be in front of me. So I kinda stand still, not really sure what to do. It's getting closer and closer to the road and then it goes out of view. So I walk a little farther and can see that the road is curving to the right. I quietly peek around the corner as I get farther up and I see an old-timey beater ducking hell of a truck parked on the side of the road with its lights off, engine quietly running. There's these two old men with wizard beards hauling plastic jugs of liquid into the bed of the truck. One of them has a blue headlamp and has the one that came from the woods. Only then as I hid quietly did I realize I had discovered and was witnessing moonshine bootleggers going about their business. On one of my rare trips out into the wilderness, I was walking in the middle of bumduck nowhere on some kind of natural trail, possibly made by deer. I was looking for a place to rest and it was beginning to turn to dusk, light enough to keep going for a while, but the shadows were deepening and the edges of the trail were too dark to see properly. As I walk, I hear a sheep baying. At first it doesn't strike me as unusual, because on the surface, hearing a sheep in the country doesn't seem out of place. Then I hear it again, directly from the shadows to my left, and two things hit me at once. 1, this is deep wilderness and there is no farmland around me. 2, the baying sounds too perfect. It sounds like somebody doing a really good impression of a sheep, but as I hear it again I realize it's the same pitch and length each time, like a recording. The more I hear it, the more unnerving it gets. I keep walking, and seconds later I draw even with it. As I walk past I catch a glimpse of a figure crouched in the bushes just off the trail, and a flash of teeth as, I assume, whoever or whatever was there grinned at me. I did not stop anywhere near there that night. Camping in a small wooded area that only had one track leading to our campsite. Two friends and I are sitting chatting by the fire when one of my friends notices a light in the distance, behind our campsite. It freaks us out because where the light is coming from a place that is impossible to get to unless you go past our campsite. Otherwise, it would take you hours crossing bogland, think swamp, and rocky hills from the nearest road. We watch the light as it moves towards us, slowly but surely. Then a second light appears next to it. At that point, we thought duck this. We grabbed whatever crap we could and bolted out of there. Followed the track to my car and drove to my friend's parents' house. We were really embarrassed for getting so scared, but when we told my friend's dad he seemed concerned. He couldn't understand how or why anyone would be out there. That freaked us out more. The next day we went back to get our tent, and other stuff, and it looked like someone had entered the campsite. Things were moved and one bag we left behind was opened and everything emptied out. Took me a couple of days to shake the feeling of creepiness. From r/let's not meet. Not mine, credit goes to user CMVR2256. r/let's not meet epic. I've been reading stories on here for a while now and figured I'd post my own. I had to get my brother to help recount this as I was 12 at the time, and scared crapless as a result. This happened about 6 years ago. As stated, I was about 12 and my brother was 26 at the time. My brother had been serving in the US Army for several years when this happened and was deploying to the Middle East on his second deployment if I remember correctly. Also of note was that he is a Green Beret and had recently, 3 or 4 months prior to this trip, completed the Army Special Forces qualification course, Robin Sage and all that, and by then was an active duty SF engineer sergeant. Definitely not someone you'd want to duck around with. Given that we both grew up with a passion for the outdoors, he thought it would be nice to take me on a backpacking trip in northern Alabama, the Sipsey Wilderness for those familiar with the area, before he left for 9 months. The trip had gone smoothly up until the third night we were camping out. Around 8 p.m. we had our camp set up, eaten dinner and were sitting by the fire talking about typical boy crap, guns, girls, etc. For some reference, our spot was about 50 yards from a large stream, and about 50 yards downhill adjacent to the large path. Our camp, the stream, and the path formed a triangle of sorts. This was summertime in Alabama, so it wasn't quite dark yet when 2 guys, who looked to be in their late 20s, wandered up and asked if we had seen any hogs while we were hiking around. Given that this is rural Alabama, we actually had seen some farther into the wilderness area and told them so. Even though they were relatively polite, my brother called them good old boys. I got a seriously creepy vibe from them: dirty clothes, greasy hair, scraggly facial hair, etc. I think they probably looked like they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They kinda hung out for a few minutes, maybe a little longer than they should have, looking around, asking us questions like how long we had been out there, how long we were staying, and what looked like them, kinda sizing us up. They then abruptly said goodbye and walked away. I didn't necessarily feel threatened by them, and I know for sure my brother didn't, but I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. Fast forward 3 or 4 hours. My brother and I had gone to sleep and were nestled in our tent when I woke to the sound of multiple dogs barking. I've always been a heavy sleeper and they sounded like they were only about 100 yards away. My heart immediately started pounding and I kicked my brother through my sleeping bag and asked if he was awake / had heard the dogs. He responded, "I'm awake, they've been getting closer for the past hour or so, just lay still and don't make any sounds." Needless to say, 12-year-old me was about to crap my pants. We would also hear sporadic shouts from several different sources but neither came any closer. A few minutes later my brother whispered, "They're just hunting for hogs, they use the dogs to pin them down and then they shoot them." This gave me some relief, but not much. Somehow I managed to fall back asleep. The fact that they were doing this at night was a huge red flag, my brother later told me, but I think he was just trying to keep me calm. Fast forward what was probably another 3 hours, around 2 a.m. I had managed to sleep pretty well after first hearing the hog hunters when I woke up to my brother squeezing my shoulder firmly, saying, "Wake up, put your shoes on quick and follow me, be as quiet as you can." My heart immediately went back to racing because I heard the dogs and voices in the distance, farther away than before but still distinct. Not asking any questions, I did what he said, and as soon as we were out of the tent he told me to get on his back. This was a breeze for him after rucking with God knows how much weight in the army. We snuck about 50 yards into the woods towards the junction of the path and the stream and crawled into some bushes. It was up a hill so we had a pretty good elevated view of our campsite. I remember as we were laying there how loudly I was breathing and how quiet he was when I heard the very distinct sound of a pistol slide racking. I looked over and my brother had his pistol, a HK-USP that he gave to me a few years after this story took place, and was watching the campsite and surrounding area. I started to whisper to him when he put his hand over my mouth and pointed at the campsite. The group of hunters had been steadily approaching our camp and by this time, 30 or so minutes, had reached it. There were 5 of them and like 3 or 4 dogs. They all looked relatively young but 2 had either rifles or shotguns and the dogs were going crazy, obviously having smelled our scent. For those of you who are backpackers / campers, nobody who comes up on a random camp in the middle of the night with dogs and guns and has good intentions. I knew this, and my brother knew this. I was scared crapless. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but my brother later told me they were talking about us, although he hadn't heard any specifics either. They lingered for about 20 minutes shining flashlights around and talking to themselves when my brother put his mouth to my ear and said, "If they come towards, I want you to turn and run as quickly as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, stay off the trail and look for the flashing lights." I didn't know what he meant by this, but that'll come later. I knew I could make it back because he had taught me land nav pretty well. He then handed me a flashlight and told me not to take the red filter off. He told me later that the red filter helps preserve night vision and cuts down ambient light so it would be harder for someone to see from a distance. At this point I was so scared I almost started crying, but at the same time had a rush of adrenaline and what I think now was confidence that he thought I could handle myself. We laid there for a while longer when out of nowhere they started screaming, "Where y'all at?" and firing into the woods at random. My brother dragged me back behind the crest of the hill and threw himself on top of me. Thankfully our position on top of the hill we were protected from any gunfire. They shot maybe 5 or 6 more times and then started walking back the direction they had come. They got maybe 100 yards away when I heard a blaring siren and saw emergency lights flashing through the woods. Turns out my brother had called the Forest Service office on a satellite phone my family has for emergencies while I was asleep, and they had sent out Forest Service officers and game wardens to our area of the wilderness. The Sipsey Wilderness is about 25,000 acres in size, so it took them a while to get there on the dirt roads. When we saw the game warden truck my brother signaled them with the light and pointed them in the direction the hunters had gone, and the guy sped off shining his spotlight through the woods. As soon as they were all gone we went back to our camp, packed up our crap and waited by the path for the game warden to come back, who then gave us a ride in his truck bed back to the main staging area. On the drive back my brother told me how brave I had been and that we would talk about it with our parents the next day if I wanted to. I asked him not to do that because I thought they might never let me go camp again. Creepy rednecks in the woods, let's not meet again, you might get shot next time. Follow up, we never got any definitive information on what happened to the rednecks we encountered. I have many friends who have gone out to the Sipsey area and had a great time with no creepy stuff going on. However, it is truly a wilderness area and law enforcement response, if you can even reach them, would be slow. I was lucky that my brother was there and reacted so quickly, otherwise who knows what could have happened. We also got lucky that whatever their intentions were, they either reconsidered or lost interest. I will note that when they left our camp the game warden showed up pretty soon afterwards, but I didn't see what the guys and their dogs did. If I remember correctly they headed in a direction parallel to the stream, away from the trail inaccessible to any kind of vehicle. Maybe the warden continued on and took another trail to try and cut them off? We waited around 30 minutes for him to come back and he said there were other officers out looking. There are only so many paths that you could take a truck or quad bike down, so any thorough search effort would also have to be done on foot. One time we were hiking around the camp area and got a bit lost. Time snuck up on us and before we knew it, it was pitch black. I had insisted that we carry torches, water, etc., just in case, so we could see okay. So we were stumbling around with these lights that lit up a very small amount powerfully, rather than sending a broad beam. So we were heading towards where we thought the camp was when suddenly in my beam of light, a bright white woman's face appeared, staring right at me. We had accidentally come up on her camp. Then, her dog woke up and started barking, and instantly she started barking along with him too. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Illuminated by the light was just this face snarling and barking like an animal. We freaked out and ran off without saying anything and managed to find our camp fairly close by. But knowing this wolf lady was out there nearby was enough to keep us up all night. Predictably once morning came we couldn't find her site and we left the same day because of how unsettling it was. She really looked insane.